Today
Way out
is,
there.
it is Tuesday, November 17th, 2020, and we're here at the Grace Lutheran Church in DeSoto, Missouri, for our session of Catechesis for tonight. And so we've had so far introductions, prefaces to the small and large catechisms. Who can tell me, off the top of your head, do you remember the 6 chief parts of Luther's small catechism? Who can call them out?
Lord's Prayer, Apostles' Creed.
Nice and loud there, Mike Nephew.
10 Commandments, Lord's Prayer, Apostles' Creed, Baptism, Communion, Sacrament of the Altar, and Confession, Absolution.
That's not in the correct order.
Oh, the correct order.
Correct order.
10 Commandments, the Apostles' Creed, the Lord's Prayer, Baptism, Sacrament of the Altar, and Confession, Absolution.
Not quite.
Really? The last 3 is
The 10 Commandments, the Creed, the Lord's Prayer, the Sacrament of Holy Baptism, then Confession, then the Sacrament of the Altar. So let's try that all together, right? The 6 chief parts. The 10 Commandments, the Creed, the Lord's Prayer, the Sacrament of Holy Baptism, Confession, and the Sacrament of the Altar. And who can tell me what year Luther published both the Small Catechism and the Large Catechism? Remember the year?
1529.
1529, Scar.
Good job.
I guess the old
That
Scar.
was the note.
Senior notes. I'm glad you took good notes.
Yeah,
That's
that was on the
important.
notes last night. I remember seeing
So
that.
you get credit for your notes. All right. So those are the 6 chief parts in the Small Catechism. In the Large Catechism, Luther does not include in the original edition of the Large Catechism a section on confession and absolution, but he does also write a brief exhortation and confession that was then included in many editions of the Large Catechism from that point forward. All right. 10 Commandments, Creed, Lord's Prayer, Sacrament of Holy Baptism, Confession, and the Sacrament of the Altar. Luther's Small Catechism, 1529. And so we've looked at the prefaces for both the Small and Large Catechisms. And now we're going to go to the first chief part, which is
10 Commandments.
10 Commandments. All right, since we're talking about the 10 Commandments, it's probably a good idea to actually look them up. Where will you find the 10 Commandments in the Bible?
Exodus 20.
Exodus 20 is the first place you will find the 10 Commandments. So if you have a Bible handy, let's go there. Exodus chapter 20. Now, what had happened in the chapters leading up to this? What had been going on in history?
Oh, Exodus from Egypt.
The Exodus from Egypt, right? Under the Lord brought the Israelites out of bondage and slavery in Egypt to under the leadership of Moses after the plagues, and then that night they fled from Egypt, and the Lord brought them to where?
Mount Sinai.
Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai, also sometimes called Mount Horeb, in the Sinai Peninsula, where he brings them to himself. And he's going to give them, through Moses, a way of life that is meant to distinguish the Israelites as his holy people. This is God's design for humanity, for his people, how they are to live. And it's in the form of the 10 Commandments that we find in Exodus chapter 20. So, if you're all there, would somebody first of all read, and I'm just taking volunteers to read nice and loud. Let's start with Exodus chapter 20, verses 1 through 6.
And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments.
All right, we're just going to read through here. Would somebody read verses 7 through 11?
You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day. And how far did you say you got?
That's far. That's so far. And then would somebody read verses 12 through 17?
Honor your father and your mother, that the days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male servant, nor his female servant, nor his ox, nor his donkey, nor anything that is your neighbor's.
All right. So there are the 10 Commandments in there. We usually work with a shortened, abridged version of just the commandments themselves. Now, that generation was given these 10 Commandments. Of course, they didn't keep them very well. And they were grumbling and kvetching against Moses and against the Lord. You know the word kvetching? It's a Yiddish word. I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood. It means grousing, grumbling, griping. So that generation, what happened to them? They perished in the desert. All except, well, at the end of it, Moses was still alive, and 2 guys who would be able to enter the Promised Land, who were Joshua and Caleb. But that whole generation died out over 40 years, wandering in the wilderness. So then they come up to the plains of Moab. They're about to enter the Promised Land. And Moses then has to have a review session with Israel, the next generation. Because all the ones who were adults at this time have died out. And so now that the ones who were kids or that were born during the 40 years, they're now going to be the ones to enter the Promised Land. And so Moses has a review session going over the same stuff. And where do we find then the second giving of the law?
Deuteronomy?
Deuteronomy. In fact, the word Deuteronomy means second law, the second giving of the law. So if you turn to the book of Deuteronomy, this will be the other place you'll find the 10 Commandments. In Deuteronomy chapter 5.
Where's Deuteronomy?
Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. You got confirmed, Calista, without having to memorize the books of the Bible?
I can't memorize it.
Oh.
I don't have the ability to memorize it.
Well, you can play the organ and piano a lot better than I can, so don't worry.
Only if I stare at the nose. I cannot memorize.
All right, let's see if you can remember the 5 books of Moses. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. There we go. So Deuteronomy chapter 5. I was just teasing there, Calista. I wasn't trying to put you on the spot. Deuteronomy chapter 5. And let me start reading here. So Moses called all Israel and said to them, Hear, O Israel, the statutes and judgments which I speak in your hearing today, that you may learn them and be careful to observe them. The Lord our God made a covenant with us in Horeb. Again, that referring to Mount Sinai. The Lord did not make this covenant with our fathers, but with us, those who are here today, all of us who are alive. Now, look at verse 3. In a way, verse 3 is wrong. What do I mean by that?
The covenant with Abraham.
Well, no. I'm not referring to that.
Oh.
He's referring now, he's going to be going over the Ten Commandments. And he says, the Lord did not make this covenant with our fathers, but with us, those who are here today, all of us who are alive. In what sense would I say verse 3 is actually not correct?
He made it with their fathers.
He made it with their fathers, the previous generation, who now have all died off pretty much. But why does Moses say, it's not with our fathers, it's with you guys here today? What is he emphasizing by that?
Well, the fathers are gone, so it's them who's going to need to keep it.
Yeah, this applies to you guys. You may have just been little kids or not even born yet 40 years ago, but this is God speaking to you today. Is the point he's making. The Lord talked with you face to face on the mountain from the midst of the fire. I stood between Yahweh, that's the Lord, and you at that time to declare to you the word of the Lord, etc. And then he said, I am Yahweh, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, etc. And then you have the Ten Commandments. So actually that, the first word there, I am Yahweh, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, that's kind of like the preface to the Ten Commandments. Saying, here's who I am, here's who you are in relation to me. And this is, so I am your God, you are my people, this is how I want you to live. That's how he's setting it. I've delivered you from bondage, you're my people, I've done everything for you, therefore live this way to show that you are my people. Now, we call these the Ten Commandments. In either Exodus 20 or Deuteronomy 5, are they numbered? I mean, there are verse numbers, but are the commandments numbered 1 through 10? No. Why do we call them the Ten Commandments?
10 is a significant number in the Bible. It's completeness.
Yeah.
But
But we actually do
Other than
count
that.
10 of them, right? Now, look in Deuteronomy 4. Here's where we get the word Ten Commandments. Deuteronomy chapter 4.
Because it was in the movie.
Yeah, that's right.
Charlton Heston
Right.
is 10.
Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 13. Somebody want to read that verse?
So he declared to you his covenant, which he commanded you to perform the 10 Commandments, and he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone.
That's the only place in the Bible where they're called the Ten Commandments. And in fact, the word there for commandments, now in this edition of the Bible, it doesn't have a text note there, but do you have an edition of the Bible where there's a text note for the word commandments, like the bottom of the page somewhere? I know I think in the ESV they give a text note at the word commandments.
Let's see.
Does anybody see that?
On this one.
The word in Hebrew there is not actually the word commandments. It's the word words. The 10 words. Devarim in Hebrew. But we call it the 10 Commandments because they're kind of in the form of commandments. But it actually says the 10 words. Devarim. Anybody find something on that? Right. So here are we call them the 10 Commandments. But how do we, looking at either Exodus 20 or Deuteronomy 5, how do you come up with 10? Let's see if you can number them. Looking at either Exodus 20 or Deuteronomy 5, how would you come up with 10?
The you shalls?
Well, you call them out to me and tell me how you would number the 10 Commandments. Are you looking at Exodus 20 or Deuteronomy 5?
I'm in Deuteronomy. I just started
Go
checking.
to, yeah, or go to either one.
You shall have no other gods before me.
Okay.
You shall not make for yourself a carved image, blah, blah, blah. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain.
Would that be your third one you're counting?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay.
Then it doesn't say in that way you shall, it says observe, so it's like
That's an imperative, that's a command.
Observe, so there's honor your father and your mother is again a direct command. And then you shall not commit murder, or you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, you shall not covet.
And that's how you come up with 10? Does that make 10?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
All right, that's one way to count 10 and come up with 10. That is not the way that we number them, or that most Christians throughout history have numbered them. But if you were to go to a so-called Christian bookstore and look for a plaque or something, that's probably what they would have, that way. But that's not the most common way throughout history. That's not the traditional numbering system.
Well, somebody told me there were more than 10 in the Torah. The Bible had way more than 10.
Well, in the whole, I mean, the Pharisees would talk about 613 commands. All right, but that's not, it's like if your ox gores your neighbor's ox, give him the amount plus 20% or something like that. So, but these are the biggies here. And that's one way to come up with 10, but that's not the numbering system that most of Christianity has used throughout history. How do we come up with 10?
There's number 4, I always thought, well, your father and your mother. 1, 2, 3.
Isn't it a matter of, it seems to me like we combined the first, split them up, combined the first part of it and split up the,
split up the cover.
It might be, on that matter, look, I think the Exodus 20, the language might be a little clearer in Exodus 20.
Because it actually puts a semicolon in between, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, and you shall not covet your neighbor's.
Yeah, if you look at Exodus 20, it might be a little easier to see that.
Moses to put a semicolon in.
It was. He thought of that in Hebrew.
So Mike, you're getting at it. So you're suggesting Exodus 20 verse 17 to make 2 covenant commandments there.
Yeah.
All right? So now you got 11 commandments. How do you get back to 10?
Well, the first one, really, if you look at the first one, it kind of covers the same concept.
Which
you shall
one?
have no other gods.
Yeah, and combining it with...
And you shall make your graven images. So
Yes, that's it. That's the way we take, and Roman Catholics and Anglicans, Episcopalians, for most of Christian history, that's the traditional numbering system that we use. That we subsume the graven images part under you shall have no other gods. And make that whole thing, consider that the first commandment. And we separate out the 2 coveting commandments, one about your neighbor's stuff and one about your neighbor's relationships. Okay? So that's how we come up with 10. Any questions on that? Now, if you all have a hymnal handy, you all have a hymnal handy? If somebody doesn't, there's a stack here. Now, by the way, Barb, are we going to be able to keep a bunch of hymnals here?
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be a problem. I counted about 71 in there and on the pews themselves. And leaving, like, of course, the organ and your side are safe, but and Christie's is safe, and then kind of figuring out where people sit. So kind of left them all kind of spread out, so people should be okay.
Yeah.
There's a lot over there now.
All right. So if you have a hymnal, turn to page 264. Page 264. In the service of prayer and preaching. And there on one handy page, you can see the first 3 parts of the Catechism, what are called the primary texts. I'll use that phrase sometimes, the primary text, to mean just the words here of the 10 Commandments, the Creed, the Lord's Prayer themselves, without all the what does this means in there, right? So when I'm talking about just the 10 Commandments, just the Creed, just the Lord's Prayer themselves, I sometimes use the phrase, the primary text. All right, so here we have the first 3 parts of the Catechism. And let's read together the Ten Commandments. Are you ready to do that? Let's do it. The Ten Commandments. You shall have no other gods. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Honor your father and your mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his manservant or maidservant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. So you can see there, delineated out 10 of them, right? In fact, it's nice that God gave us 10 fingers, so that I've often taught kids when they were saying 10 Commandments, use your fingers. You shall have no other gods. You shall not misuse them in the Lord your God and so on. It helps to reinforce it that way. By the way, did any of you learn the 10 Commandments with different wording?
Like the kill and the murder, you mean?
And
Thou shalt not kill.
Yeah.
Thou shalt not
King James,
steal.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I
Bear false
really wasn't
witness.
taught the Ten Commandments, but I heard them.
Okay, you probably heard it was a thou shalt. Thou shalt.
Right, but lying instead of bear false witness.
Okay, these got an updated, well, you probably didn't have the thou shalt then. You probably said,
I don't know how.
now, here's a good idea, don't lie. You know, dynamic equivalent or something. But this is, you know, I learned the old King James language, thou shalt not, and so forth.
Yeah.
Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor, you know, and with put the best construction in it. So
Yeah.
I learned with the old language, so I got different compartments in my brain with all these different hymns and Bible translations and Catechism translations in there. So this would be a good challenge to try to memorize those. And maybe take a crack at that over the next week to try to see, can I get those down? I think of these three, the one that's easiest, probably everybody knows, is the Lord's Prayer. But then probably the Apostles' Creed, and then work on the Ten Commandments to actually fix them in your brain. Okay? Now, of those 10 Commandments, we tend to have a grouping of, into how many different groups?
Two.
Two. What do we call those groupings into two?
Tables?
The two tables of the law, right? And which commandments do we put in which group?
Well, I know there's one about God, and then there's one, the rest of them are for everything else.
Star, how would you group them that way then?
The first three.
The first three,
Mhm.
and then 4 through 10
Mhm.
would be what we call the second table of the law. That's correct. So the first three are more about our direct relationship with God. And 4 through 10, those 7 are more about our horizontal relationship with our members, with our neighbor, that's what I meant to say, with our neighbor, which also is a reflection of how we fear, love, and trust in God, how we treat our neighbor. So commandments 1 through 3 are called the first table of the law, and commandments 4 through 10 are called the second table of the law. And if you have this catechism here, you can see an illustration of that, for example, on page 13. Do you have one of these books handy? Right? Look on page 13 in this book. You see that? Page 13. You see how they have in Roman numerals 1, 2, and 3 on one side, and then 4 through 10 on the other side. It's on page 13 in this book.
I've heard pastors use the term the first and second table of the law, and I never knew what they were talking about.
Now you know.
Thank you. I'm a bad Christian.
Calissa, no.
No, bad.
How many times have I said that every time I've taught the catechism for people who've been Lutherans for decades, it never fails somebody to say, I never knew that before.
I think as I've heard it multiple times, that the pastor may be making an unknown assumption that all of us
Right?
have the church history
Yeah.
remind us, I was an adult when I went through a 3-week catechism slam bam thinky bam thing.
3 weeks, slam bam, thank you, man, that's a good way to
Yeah,
put
And I
it.
remember it had a workbook,
They did a pretty fast.
you know, and I remember a catechism that I didn't memorize
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah, me
You know, what-
either.
But now, how would you, if somebody asked you, Calissa, what do we mean by the 2 tables of the law?
I would not have any clue what you were talking about.
Now, today, after we just...
Oh, today I would, yeah,
Now
I
what
would
would you
say that the commandments about God and the commandments that are meant about our lives.
About our neighbor. Love for God and love for neighbor. Commandments 1 through 3 are more directly about our love for God and His Word and His name. And commandments 4 through 10 are
Is that
more
in
about...
reference to when Christ said that He summed it up? Is
That's
that what
what-
that
Two
means?
great
Yeah.
commandments.
You're reading my brain because that's where I'm going next.
Yeah.
Where would we find that? This is not something Lutherans made up. Jesus Himself sums up the 10 Commandments this way. And where would we find that in the Bible?
New Testament.
In the New Testament. Very good.
Hey, that's fine.
You narrow it down. I bet you could narrow it down. The Gospel.
It's the Gospels, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you narrow it down further.
Well, I didn't hear what Elizabeth said.
She
Probably
said that
midway
Jesus
between Matthew-
Himself summed up the 10 Commandments this way.
Probably Matthew 13.
About love for God and love for neighbor.
Seems to me maybe he's addressing some young lawyer or something.
Yes.
Mhm.
Matthew chapter 22, verses 36 through 39. Please turn there. Matthew, first book of the New Testament. About 3/4 of the way. If you have a Bible, you can always do it this way. Take your Bible, go about 3/4 of the way through, and you'll land in the book of Matthew, like I just
See,
did.
that's how good my memory is. I forgot what verse I was before.
Matthew 22, verses 36 through
Now,
39.
this I've heard many times.
What have you heard many times?
Jesus said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind." This is the
Oh,
first
yeah.
and great commandment. I remember I've heard that one.
And the second is like unto it, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I learned it in the King James Version. So Matthew 22, actually in verses 37 through 39 is where he says, and on these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets. So Jesus Himself sums up the 10 commandments with these 2 verses from the Old Testament. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And the second is like unto it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Now, Jesus is quoting 2 Old Testament verses here, but they're not from the 10 Commandments themselves. Where would you find where Jesus is quoting from in verse 37 and in verse 39? Does your Bible there have
Yeah, it does have
reference?
those now.
Deuteronomy 6:5 for the first.
Turn to Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5. I should start with Deuteronomy 6, verse 4. Shema Yisrael. Here, speaking Hebrew, Scott. Shema Yisrael, Adonai, Eloheinu, Adonai, Echad. That's Deuteronomy 6, verse 4. And I'm using Adonai instead of Yahweh, because that's how you probably have heard it. Shema Yisrael, Yahweh, Eloheinu, Yahweh, Echad, or Adonai. So, Deuteronomy 6, verse 4, the great Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And then the next verse, Deuteronomy 6, verse 5, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God. Read it. What does it say
With
there?
all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength.
With all your heart, soul, strength. However it's translated there. So that's the verse Jesus quotes to talk about. And he's summing up the first table of the law that way. And then when he sums up the second table of the law, when he says love your neighbor as yourself, where is he getting that from?
Leviticus 19.
Leviticus 19, verse 18. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And he says, on these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets. So all the commandments are summed up, Jesus says, in love the Lord your God with everything that's in you, and love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. And everybody loves himself.
Leviticus what?
19, verse 18.
Okay.
So that's Jesus saying you can sum up the 10 commandments that way. All right. Let's see, what else do I want to say about the 10 commandments tonight? That I I covered at Bontier this afternoon. Let's see here. So this is Moses giving the Ten Commandments to Israel in 1446 BC. At the beginning, and then 1406 at the Deuteronomy time, 40 years later. But what about people and to whom were the Ten Commandments given? To whom were the Ten Commandments given?
Israelites.
The Israelites. Israel. So, any Israelites here? Well, Scott, maybe this place. I'm not an Israelite that I know of. And we don't worship on Saturday, do we?
No.
So the Sabbath is Saturday. So I guess the Ten Commandments don't have anything to do with us? Or do they? St. Paul talks about this in Romans. Let's turn to the book of Romans. So in Romans chapter 1, starting in verse 18, St. Paul talks about the role of the law and doing or not doing God's commands and what that results in. So Romans 1:18, for the wrath, the anger of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. So God has righteous anger against man's sin. And that will apply to both the Jews and the Gentiles. Who are Jews? How would you define Jews?
Believers.
Those
that believe.
No, who are Jews? I mean, what is the definition?
Theological.
Ethnically,
Yeah.
they're descended from,
Abraham?
well, but not just Abraham, because that would include Arabs too, Semites. But a Jew would be someone who's descended not just from Abraham, but also, no, to go down the three patriarchs.
Isaac?
Abraham, Isaac,
And Jacob.
Remember, Jacob had his name changed to Israel.
Oh, gotcha.
So the children of Israel would be all the ones physically descended from Jacob, Israel, but also Abraham. We usually talk about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Anyone descended physically from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is a Jew. Everyone who is not descended from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is a Gentile. That's just ethnically the case. So the Ten Commandments were given to the Hebrews, later called the Jews. So they had God's law, His will for people, how to live, on the stone tablets given through Moses on Mount Sinai. But is there any law applying to the Gentiles, those who aren't Israelites? That's what Paul takes up in Romans 1 and 2, and then I turn to the Jews in Romans 3. So in Romans 1 says that even the Gentiles who don't know God, they should know that there is a God and they're accountable to Him, and they should do what He wants, but they don't. And do what their Creator wants. And he talks about all their sins in like verse 29, all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, etc., etc. So the Gentiles are breaking these commandments, even though they didn't have the Ten Commandments. And then in chapter 2 says, therefore you are inexcusable, O man. There's no excuse for you doing these things. And then look at verse 12. And watch how nimble St. Paul is with his use of the term law. He'll go back and forth between law as Ten Commandments, specifically, given to Israel, and law as the will of God applying to all people. That that condemns us. Romans 2, verse 12. For as many as have sinned without law, that means Gentiles who don't have the Ten Commandments, will also perish without law. All right, so the Gentiles who don't have the Ten Commandments, the law will still convict them and condemn them. And as many as have sinned in the law will be judged by the law. That be the Jews, who have the Ten Commandments but don't keep them. They will convict the Jews. For not the hearers of the law are just in the sight of God, but the doers of the law will be justified. Verse 14. For when Gentiles, that is non-Jews, who do not have the law, they didn't get the Ten Commandments from Moses, by nature do the things in the law. In other words, they have a sense of what's the right thing to do. That gets warped, it gets callous, but they know it's not right to kill somebody. They know it's not right to steal things or to ruin your neighbor's reputation. For when Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do the things in the law, these, although not having the law, they don't have the Ten Commandments, are a law to themselves. In other words, they know there's right and wrong, and they don't do the right and they do the wrong. And so there's the law without the Ten Commandments. Verse 15, who show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and between themselves their thoughts accusing or else excusing them on the day of judgment. So Gentiles who don't have the Ten Commandments, they may never have heard of the Ten Commandments. They know there's a standard of right and wrong of behavior. And so this is how all societies, all cultures, if I read, and I studied in Asia about Confucianism and Buddhism and things. I mean, you didn't have to be a Christian to know you should respect your elders, you should plan wisely, these sorts of things. Confucius understood that stuff. The original Buddha had some good sayings like that. The Greek philosophers knew there was ethics to live by. They didn't always do it, they didn't have any gospel, but they had a sense there's right and wrong behavior, okay? You don't have to be a Christian to know there's right and wrong behavior, okay? That's evidence of the law written on human hearts. God has kind of hardwired us that way. Now, cultures and societies get away from that, as we're seeing in my own lifetime. I've seen what used to be accepted public morality no longer be the case.
Yeah.
I mean, in my own lifetime, I've seen this change. And now they're calling the good evil and evil good. But there is this sort of standard of right and wrong behavior that's sort of hardwired into human beings. And this is the basis for all civil laws against murder, against stealing, against bearing false witness in court, and so forth. This is what we call the first use of the law, because that's common among humanity, and it's the basis for all civil laws. But the law then, whether we're a Jew or a Gentile, convicts us as sinners who've broken God's commandments. Now in chapter 3 he goes on, well, what about you Jews? And I'm a Jew, he says. We've got the commandments, and yet we break them. So we're as guilty as, we're maybe in a sense more guilty, because we should know better. And so he wraps up like a prosecuting attorney in Romans 3, verse 19, against all of humanity. Now we know that whatever the law says, it says to those who are under the law, that every mouth may be stopped, and all the world may become guilty before God. This is what we call the second use of the law, the mirror function, that shows us that we're sinners.
What's the curve?
First use of the law is what we call the curve,
Yeah.
to keep order in the world. See, because God's written his law about right and wrong behavior onto human hearts. It's the basis of civil laws, and it keeps bad behavior within some bounds. So that's what we call the first use of the law, to keep order in the world. Second use of the law is the mirror function, to show us that you're a sinner, and you are not righteous before God. We'll talk more about uses of the law later on. But that's what Paul's getting at here. Any questions on that? So whether the Jews who have the Ten Commandments on stone tablets, or Gentiles who have the sense of right and wrong behavior written on their hearts, there's a law that will convict you and condemn you. Now, what about people before Moses? I mean, the Ten Commandments were given to Israel in 1446 BC, roughly. But what about the people who lived before that? Did they have any law?
Would that be the same as with Gentiles, those that having it written on their heart?
Yes. And in fact, God giving a commandment and man breaking it goes back all the way to,
Yeah.
well, before Cain and Abel.
Adam and Eve.
Adam and Eve. Look at Genesis chapter 2.
Yeah.
Genesis chapter 2. Now this is before Eve has been made, but Adam has been made, created. And in Genesis chapter 2, verse 15, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to tend and keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die. Now, Adam didn't have 10 commandments to keep and not keep. Adam, he just had one job there.
One job.
Well, actually, he had two jobs. One was to tend the garden, and the other was to
Not eat of that tree.
not eat of that tree. And so this was the one command. He gave Adam an opportunity to willingly obey him by giving him a command. And it was just, you got all these trees here. I'm not holding out on you, but this one tree, don't eat of it. That's about making decisions about, you can make your own decisions about good and evil. And the Lord God attached a threat to that command, didn't he? For in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. So there's a command and a threat. Then you know the story. We went over it a couple months ago from Genesis 3. So then the Lord provides a companion for Adam in the form of the woman. And so Adam got the command directly from God. He's the pastor of the first church. His congregation is his wife. And she got it from him. He's the pastor of that church. And so now the serpent comes along and he's going to get at the couple through the woman who wasn't there to get the command, but she got it from her pastor. Has God indeed said, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And, we can eat of all these trees, but there's this one tree we're not supposed to eat of it. Nor shall you touch it, lest you die. So she heard this from her pastor. She got it basically right, although she has the part like you can't even touch it. But then the serpent says, oh, no, you're not going to die. And he casts aspersions on God. For God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be open and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. And then there's something appealing about the object of the desire. It looks good, it's going to be tasty, and it's desirable to make one wise, so she takes it and eats it. Her husband's right there, who could have put a stop to that, but he didn't, and he eats of it. And then they're aware of shame, and they try to cover up their shame with something of their own making. They're afraid of God. They're hiding from God. And then they pass the buck. The man blames the woman you gave me, so he's really blaming God. And the woman says, the devil made me do it, blaming the serpent, and so on. And so, now think of how this is programmatic for the breaking of all commands and of all sin. This is the original sin. And remember how, take your catechism, and either from this book or in the hymnal on page 321, you'll find it there. Look at the first commandment with the meaning. And do you all see the first commandment with the what does this mean, whether in the hymnal on page 321 or in your catechism in the book on page 13, either way? Let's read together the first commandment with Luther's what does this mean. Ready? The first commandment, you shall have no other gods. What does this mean?
We should fear, love, and trust in God above all things.
So in this first sin, the commandment says you shall have no other gods. How do they break that right off the bat? Well, just take you shall have no other gods.
They want to be like God.
They were their own God. They became their own God. To be like God. See, at the root of all sin is every one of us wants to be our own God. And every time we break the commandment of God, we are making ourselves our own God, making our own decisions about good and evil. So that is why the first commandment is the overarching commandment of all commandments. Because every time you break any one of them, you are making yourself your own God. And then Luther rightly explains that as we should fear, love, and trust in God above all things. In this instance, were Adam and Eve fearing God? God had given them a threat. The day you eat of it, you shall surely die. They did not take that seriously. In fact, the devil said, no, you're not going to die. Were they loving God? No. They were not seeking to do His will, putting Him first or everything like that. Were they trusting in God? No, they think God's holding out on them, right? Yeah, no, He doesn't want you to have this, and He's selfish or whatever. So they think, well, that's pretty good. We ought to have it. We deserve it. So at the root of all sin is you make yourself your own God, you don't fear His threat, you don't love Him, and you don't trust Him. That's true in every single sin. So this is why Luther then will say that the first commandment is the one that runs through all of the commandments. So that's an explanation then of the first commandment, you shall have no other gods. Any other thoughts on that?
When I went to school, I think there was 2 more words to the first commandment.
Thou shalt have no other gods before me.
Yeah.
That means in my face.
Yeah.
And you think of Israel after they got the 10 Commandments, what's the first thing they do while Moses is up on the mountain?
The calf.
Build a golden calf.
Yeah.
And literally in the Hebrew it says like, in my face. So it's like, you got this in my face here. That means before me.
I
So,
don't understand that.
Huh?
Worshipping a thing like that. I don't get the worshiping a gold thing, you know?
all right, well, now we're moving into the next thing I want to get
Like,
to.
that's not, doesn't make sense.
It's actually investing it's like projecting your wrong desires and you making this a literal object. But you have false gods even if you don't bow down to something
Right.
out of gold or stone
Yes,
or
I get
wood. Yeah. And that's how Luther, in the large catechism, explains this. So if you have the large catechism, and Luther's very brilliant on this, turn to the large catechism.
Like
you have,
money is, you know,
what's that?
like money is
We're getting
one of
to that.
those things.
Yes. Let's see here. Does anybody need a large catechism to look at?
Yep.
Who's got one? Who needs one? I got one here, an extra. There you go.
It's a little large.
Yeah.
It's a little-
Is it a small large catechism or a large small catechism? Looking at the large catechism, and there are paragraph numbers there. I want to point out a few things.
What page is that in this video?
In this one, page 359. 359 in the Reader's Edition. I'm looking at our time. We're in good shape on time. Because we got late, we started at 6:45, really.
Mhm.
Really a 2 something.
Okay.
Just keep out of county.
Well, yeah. I have an argument.
Love your wife as yourself.
You think it was the woman you gave me.
This woman you gave me. Page 359.
Okay.
The first commandment under you shall have no other gods. And Luther keys in on the word have. What does it mean to have a God? And in paragraph 1 he says, what does it mean to have a God, or what is God? Answer, paragraph 2. Are you all following that? A God means that from which we are to expect all good, and in which we are to take refuge in all distress. So, to have a God is nothing other than trusting and believing Him with the heart. At the end of paragraph 3, whatever you set your heart on and put your trust in is truly your God. So without looking ahead there, without bowing down to a gold statue in the jungles of Papua New Guinea, how do people worship a false god or have a false god? Give me some examples without even looking further in the...
Well, I said money.
You said money.
Yeah. A lot of people depend on money,
Yeah,
and
fast
if they have
cars,
money, all is good and well
big
with them.
houses.
If they can pay the bills, but then when
Yeah.
there's no money, then that's when they go stealing or whatever they got to do to get the money.
We're going to get to that the worshiping money can be affecting both the rich or the poor.
Yeah.
Really anything you put your trust in before, like even like an EMT or a doctor, that you would put your faith in them over God
another
being
person.
taken care
Or
of.
your health or fitness. Some people make their own physical fitness a god.
Yeah.
Wherever you put your trust in.
Some people put themselves in the place of God, like they trust themselves, they don't trust anything else, they depend on themselves, I'm one of those people that has a tendency to do overwork, and I'll just do it myself.
Yeah.
I can do better.
What are the things that people worship or have a god as a god, are those things evil, necessarily evil things?
Don't have to be.
No.
Not on the
No, they could be good things.
Mhm.
But if they get out of place and become a god, like family time or recreation, well, Sunday's the only time we get together and we can have time to go and do things with family, and they don't come to church. Well, they've made that a god over God.
Yeah.
Or, again, money's not a bad thing in itself. Or popularity, or power, or fame, or what are some other things? Sports.
Or another person for your happiness.
Or sex.
Yeah.
Some people make that a god. Or a high, or something like that. It may be good things, it may be things that are not good for you. But anything you're making your number one is your God.
Well, it
I
seems
think
like
a lot of times people
Go ahead,
don't
Sarah.
realize they do that.
Yeah, they don't realize they do. Yeah.
it seems like we can't even get past this first one. I mean, we've already broken down. I mean,
Well, that's right. Because if you kept the first one, you'd keep all the rest of them.
Yeah.
And anytime you break any of them, you're always breaking the first one.
Yeah.
And Luther has great insight into this. He'll come at this under the first commandment and then as the wrap-up for all the commandments.
It just seems like what happened in Eden was not an isolated, and maybe as far as historical.
It's an isolated.
But it's a continuing event throughout.
Yes.
Figure we learn from it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Let's look at a few more things I've highlighted here. Paragraph 4, the purpose of this commandment is to require true faith and trust of the heart, which settles upon the only true God and clings to Him alone. There's only one who is worthy of such worship and clinging to, and that is the one true God. But, Star, you mentioned about the money and possessions. Look at paragraph 5, 6, 7, 8. So, Jesus talked about you cannot serve both God and mammon. So mammon is a way to refer to money and possessions in the way of an idol. And Luther says in paragraph 7, this is the most common idol on earth. And then it applies both to the rich and the poor. Look at paragraph 8. On the other hand, he who has no money doubts and is despondent, as though he knew. So when one has it, you're all happy, but if you don't have it, then you're despondent. And so both the 1% and the Bernie bros are class envy. I mean, you can worship money both ways. Either you're so rich that you think you have no cares, like the rich fool says, let's just eat, drink, and be merry, and then God says, thou fool, tonight thy soul shall be required of thee. Or the socialists and the communists who say, they got more than me, I want it. You know, or I'm going to go steal it, which is socialism and another way of stealing. You're just voting, you're stealing. So that's one common idol, is mammon, money. But it could be anything you're trusting in or boasting about. Great skill, prudence, power, favor, friendship. See, friendship could be an idol too. And then the end of 10, to have a God is to have something in which the heart entirely trusts.
I think when you get false gods, you tend to do all the rest of violate all the rest of the commandments. When you don't have the first one, you know, I can't explain it.
Well, we're going to look at some examples.
Like with the money, you know, it's not, like if you don't have money, then you're going to steal probably more than likely, because you're not trusting in and have your heart in the one true God, you know.
Right.
And you're trusting in yourself getting it by stealing it. You're taking the wheel. And so I think that's common for any false, when you have a false God, you're going to tend to get all the other commands.
So one sin leading to another.
Yes, absolutely.
We're going to look at examples of that. That's a very good point. When we get to the 9th and 10th commandments, we're going to look at a couple of biblical examples of where just the coveting of the 9th commandment, coveting of the 10th commandment, led to a whole string of other sins that were then committed. But that'll be in a few weeks. All right. So this is the number 1 commandment. Let's see, what else do I want to point out? I think we've already covered a lot of this. Paragraph 17. You can easily see and sense how the world practices only false worship and idolatry. And he's saying that all people have worship. They worship something. Everyone is set up as his special God, whatever he looked to for blessings, help, and comfort. Whatever that God is. Look at paragraph 21 about idolatry. It happens not merely by erecting an image, like a golden calf, and worshiping it, but rather it happens in the heart. Now, in Luther's time, he's pointing out this idolatry that was in the controversies that he was involved with, paragraph 22. There is also a false worship and extreme idolatry, which we have practiced up till now. He's talking about Roman Catholics. This is also still common in the world. All churchly orders, by that he means monastic orders, with which he used to be in a monastery. All churchly orders are founded on it. It concerns the conscience alone, which seeks help, consolation, and salvation in its own works. What is Luther referring to there? See, what is he talking about as a false god?
Salvation by works.
Salvation by works, right? That's what motivated Luther and others to go to the monastery. They thought by devoting their lives to that, that they were doing something for God, and that God would reward them with righteousness and life and so forth. So that's the righteousness of works, which is a false god.
That's what the social justice stuff is kind of similar, isn't it?
You can make a false god on the left or on the right.
Mm-hmm.
You can sin on either side of that to make that political power can be your god, either on the left or on the right. But he's talking here about the medieval Roman Catholic works righteousness. That and people do this. They say, well, look, I'm a better person than those lousy people over there, those celebrities. Look, I don't do what those celebrities do. I'm better than they are. And so God's certainly going to reward me. I'm a good person. You're making yourself your own idol then, by how good you are. All right. So to have the true God as your God is to look to Him for every blessing. Luther gets into that in paragraph 24. Look at paragraph 26. Even though we experience much good from other people, whatever we receive by God's command or arrangement is all received from God. Do you remember some weeks back when I talked about masks of God? You know, God delivers blessings to us generally through other people. Whether it's healing through a doctor or education through a teacher or, bread on our table from the guys who work at the grocery store, those are masks of God. The blessings are coming from God, but He's delivering them through people, and He'll deliver them to others through you. So we receive these blessings not from them, but through them from God. Creatures are only the hands, channels, and means by which God gives all things. Now, at paragraph 29, it says that God has added A, a terrible threat, and B, a beautiful, comforting promise. So here's where I left off today, because that'll get us into what Luther calls explanation of the appendix to the first commandment about I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, etc., third and fourth generation, that sort of thing. So that's where I left off at Bonterra today, and that's where we're going to pick it up next time. Do you have any closing thoughts or comments today? All right, I want to close with the blessing, but don't get up and run off right away. I want to say something after I close the lesson. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the communion of the Holy Spirit be with us all. Amen.